Hello, thank you for this introduction. And let's see if my slides are here. Okay. So just in case you're lost and you're not sure if you're in the right room, you're here. So, okay, everyone's here. But actually, I was born a little bit to the Siberian side. But now I work at a very small country of Qatar, at QCRI, Qatar Computing Research Institute. So when I say this, some people don't even know that such a country exists, but it's pretty neat. Unfortunately, most of my education in research was done in English in US, which means that even though I'm Russian and I can sit down and have tea with you and speak about the weather in Russian, this research would be in English. Although listening to people speak here, even in Russian, I hear most of the language being in English anyway. So today we will be talking about how to use Twitter to model something in the real world, and really whether we can use Twitter to benefit from it, to model something and predict something. So in my career, I've looked at several things that we could predict using Twitter, including consumer opinions about cameras, movies, etc., about political discourse, and I will talk a little bit about that today, about societal affinities, whom do we choose to mention, whom do we choose to talk about in the cultural sphere, and actually tracking dietary health. Even can we predict whether you will be whether you'll have diabetes or be obese just by looking at how you tweet. So today we'll be talking about very interesting topics that are sensationalist, and you probably heard about them in the news. They're about money and power. Everybody likes them. And so the first half of the talk will be on financial indices, about tracking small things like movie sales, and ending with actually trying to make some money on the stock exchange. And the second one will be about political movements and what can we glimpse in Twitter about these things, and in the end, whether we can predict elections using Twitter. And I will be citing a lot of papers, so if you want to read more about this, you can search for them, and they're all readily available online. And most of these slides actually come from a tutorial that I gave with my colleague Ingmar Weber. And if you search for Twitter and the real world, you will get about 4 hours of lectures on these topics, also including public health and event detection. So there's a lot more to say. So let's start with a bit of a quiz. So raise your hand if you think it's possible to make money on a stock exchange. If you invest smartly, you can get some money back. Some optimistic people here. Okay, good, good. Well, the answer is no. I'm sorry to dash your hopes, but there is such a thing as this efficient market hypothesis that basically tells you that once new information becomes available, it gets incorporated into the market right away, and basically you cannot predict anything. It will be always this perfect system, so you might be like just as smart as a cat just looking at it. Okay, but maybe it's not entirely true. This is not a perfect system, and particularly because we are people, we have our flaws. So for example, behavioral economics will tell you about all kinds of crazy things that people do. They have biases, they are overconfident about certain opinions. There are illegal things going on, like insider trading and manipulation. There are some bubbles where people speculate wildly and don't pay attention to information at all. And finally, there's Bitcoin, which is a great contentious thing, but nobody knows where actual value of it is anyway. So maybe we can make money on it. And there is a huge cottage industry of getting information from content providers, maybe providing it to traders, doing some kind of data analysis on them, and then finally trying to invest and make some money. And of course, whenever you find some traders that are using it, they say, oh yes, of course, we're using the latest tools in this area, and they always project some kind of amazing returns. But today we'll be talking about published work, actually when people are testing this and are giving us p-values for actually significance of these findings. So let's start with kind of a toy example. So everybody likes movies, and we all wonder, well, how much is a movie gonna make once it's published? There is a website where people basically get to play and project how they think a movie is gonna do. And it's kind of like a market. So if you build a linear regression on this model, then you could actually predict the opening weekend of the movie pretty well. But you can also do it with Twitter. So this paper takes almost 3 million tweets for these movies, and just the correlation between the tweeting rate is very high with the box office gross, and building a similar regression model also gives us very good predictive power. And even when the movie is out and people start to tweet about actually seeing it, you can apply some sentiment analysis and predict then the next weekend's sales. So this is very encouraging. Great, we can look at Twitter and maybe make some money. Well, let's look at the actual stocks. So this paper is actually quite interesting. So this is how you should name your papers: wild speculation. Twitter mood predicts the stock market. Okay, let's go. And it's very highly cited. So what does it actually do? It looks at Twitter in its very early days in 2008. And you can see here it's actually still growing and picking up speed. And they're applying several sentiment lexicons to it. They're just labeling words as to positive or negative, or some more intricate ones into calmness, alertness, etc. And the actual, the only significant finding of this paper is that there is some slight correlation between the calm mood and the prices of the stocks. So this is really, to me, a negative result. It has been published everywhere. People have been speculating, well, maybe it's possible, maybe it's possible. Well, it's very slightly possible. Well, let's look at some more elaborate models. And this is a very nice paper, which is, I don't know, many pages, and it's very elaborate. And they actually look at individual stocks by looking at its ticker. In Twitter, you can say something about a stock, and in particular about some stock, by just using its ticker marker. So here are examples of Twitter messages where we can see that some are advocating buying a stock, selling a stock, or holding it. So once we have these tweets, maybe we can just build some kind of machine learning classifier and classify them into buy, sell, and hold. So there are many results in this paper, but there are two very important ones. First is that the bullish tweets, the tweets that are advocating you to buy a stock, are actually almost not predictive of the actual returns of the stock. So people may say sell or buy, well, it almost doesn't do anything to the other side. And in fact, the coefficient they find negative. So if people tell you to buy, maybe it's better to sell. But the relationship is really more to the other side. Once the stock starts moving, then there are tweets that tell you to buy it. So the second part is about the volume, whether it's traded at all. In here, the relationship is a little more significant, but again, it's really more towards the other side. So Twitter is really more reactive than predictive. Another interesting part that they found was that looking at the users who were posting these tweets, there were actually very few users who were dominating the conversation. So 1.5% of the users posted more than 0.5% of all the messages. And they were looking at the predictive power of these messages. So if you post saying, oh, you should sell the stock, well, does stock actually fall. And they find that the quality of these predictions were no better for these very popular, very active users, these maybe experts that we would think. Actually, they're no better than the rest of us speculators. Okay, but so far nobody has said, well, what if we use some of this information and try trading? Would we make any money? So this last paper is actually doing this, and there are very few of them because I'm guessing once you get to this point, somebody from Wall Street comes in and says, I will give you $1 million, come work for me. So it's very nice to have actually some papers that tell us how this may be done. So here they are also looking at Twitter when it's already a little more developed at the individual individual companies, and they're trying to model the price change and the volume of the stocks. But interestingly, they don't just look at the text. They're representing these tweets as a graph. This graph has nodes that represent hashtags, tweets, retweets, users, URLs, etc. And so for each company, within some period of time, you can model the conversations about it as a graph. And also you can add to these graphs some more nodes that will link similar parts of them together, like retweet nodes. And now that you have this graph, you can compute various network measures, like number of connected components, etc. So they made a trading simulation where they had several baselines to compare to. So maybe you are just investing randomly or according to some rule, or even building a regression on the previous days and trying to predict this way. And finally, they tried using some of the measures that they've computed from these graphs. So here is how they did, and the black line is the proposed method. And this, I think the light blue one is the actual performance of the stocks. And what you see is that they did the best. Yay, it actually does work in this case. But, and it actually works when the stock market actually goes down, yet they didn't lose money, theoretically. Aha, so it's very rare to see a paper like this, where somebody is successful, perhaps at making money, and they're still in academia. But the other part is, well, does this actually warrant the actual trading? Will you make money because actually trading stocks also costs money? Will you benefit enough to warrant the effort? So just to summarize what is going on, first of all, Twitter is actually very well positioned to be a platform talking about stock market because it, for example, has these neat ways to refer to individual stocks. And we see that it's kind of possible to predict volatility or volume, but maybe not so much whether it's going to go down or up. There are models that you can build to classify these tweets on whether people are advocating to buy or sell, but in the end, these people may not be accurate. Even the experts may be as good as any Joe Schmo on the street. And finally, you just got to try it. Being hypothetical is all good and nice, and you can publish papers, but it's great to see an actual trial run. So in the end, I would say, don't fire your stockbrokers yet. These algorithms that would use this information can be very flawed and can be manipulated. And we've already seen several examples of crashes that were basically triggered by these algorithms. And in fact, there is still quite a bit of room for people here. So it's cautiously optimistic. So if you hear on an article or something, people say, yes, Twitter is the future, we can just fire everyone, show them some actual numbers. Okay, so we've talked about money, but let's talk about power. Perhaps there is a more direct relationship here between what people feel and how the political situation turns out. So can we predict political movements and maybe political outcomes of elections? And of course, these days, there are a ton of reasons to look at this. During elections, politicians are connecting to their constituents using social media. They tweet, they Facebook. People are actually looking at how many followers they have, trying to gauge their popularity. There are people discussing their governments. There's WikiLeaks. You can actually try to, raise some issues, and you can mobilize. Almost every month there's some new protest somewhere that is largely helped by this new medium of communication. So a lot of this literature, this academic literature, has been focusing on US. There are several reasons for it. First is that, well, Twitter penetration is very high in US. More or less. And it's very easy to talk about the politics there because it's dichotomous. Either you're liberal or conservative. And there are these two groups to which you can be lumped. Of course, it's not all peachy. If you look at the latest trends, actually the independents are starting to gain height. So 40% of people in the US now say that they're independent. They don't belong to any of these groups. But let's just try to forget about that. This is another complication, but this is not yet infiltrated into the actual research community. So politics is also a very ill-defined topic. What is politics? Often you have to know which topic that you're looking for. So when you're looking at Twitter and getting your tweets, you may be using some keywords that you know of, names of people, events, hashtags that are associated with these events, etc. But there are several caveats about this. So first of all, you have to know exactly what's going on. You have to be there and know the keywords that are going on. And of course, this is known best afterwards, where you can look back. But also you could try to ignore some of the parts and just say, well, I'm just not going to look at these people. They probably don't matter anyway. And that will change the outcome of your analysis as well. So the very basic component of these systems is classification into political leaning. Well, do you have opinion that goes this way or that way? And there are two main kind of schools of approaches to this. One is text-based and the other is network. So, for example, this paper presents both of them and compares them, where they have a sample of some political speech, just general political stuff, and they try to classify it into right and left. And so the text-based approach uses a bag-of-horse representation of the documents, and there's some cleaning step. You remove stop words, hashtag, etc. And then you weight the terms using their TF-IDF weighting. So all the IR people should know what that is, but basically it tells about the importance of the word in the text. Also, you can look at the hashtags only, because they're very important. They convey a lot of information, and maybe they're more informative than just text. Now, if you look at the networks, this is quite interesting. So you may simulate or induce a network on this text using some kind of definition of a relationship. So this relationship may be retweeting. So I retweeted you, so you are connected to me. Or mentioning or actual following relationship or something like that. For example, here is a retweet network of a discussion, and the way you can go about it is using label propagation. First, you look at, you initialize your nodes randomly, or maybe in some smart fashion, and then you propagate these labels and you update them over certain cycles. And eventually, it should stabilize in some groups, and then the groups can be labeled by the majority label of its members. So now we have some kind of features, and we can train some some machine learning classifiers. So, for example, here a support vector machine was used, and you get some pretty decent accuracies. And especially using the network-based methods, you get 95% accuracy. So that's very nice. So this is actually for annotating the nodes in the class, well, the users, basically. And of course, I couldn't ignore the going-ons in this area, and already there are papers coming out looking at the Twitter messages concerning Ukraine. For example, here we have some kind of statistics, and they look not only at Twitter, but also blogs, news, etc. And usually these kinds of papers give you some kind of statistics on the volume of tweets, some events that were going on, some shares of what was going on where, and finally some kind of comparisons of what the sentiments were. So here it's saying that they found more protest tweets in Ukraine and in US and UK, and more balanced ones in Russia. Well, and there are papers like this coming out every week. We looked at some tweets, here's their sentiment, awesome. Well, the actual big overarching question is, okay, you can analyze some tweets, but does it matter? Does it represent anything in the real world? Or does it represent the feelings of a nation or of a certain set of people? So first of all, we have to look at who's tweeting these things. And there is a great disparity, just like in the financial sector, here where there are people that are very dominating the conversation. So for example, in the study that I did, we looked at the conversation around the US presidential election primary season. There were many people involved, and so it was pretty complex. And we find that there is a huge number of people, 78% of the people, who tweeted a bit like once in our data set. And that's data set spanning a whole year. So this we may call a silent majority. And of course, there is a vocal minority, the 0.2% of the people that are giving us, almost 16% of our data set. So, and these people are not only tweeting more, they are actually behaving differently. So these are various behavioral statistics about these people. So you can see trends. These people are they're using more links, more hashtags, they're more tech savvy, and they're usually more promotional. They're for somebody and not against them. And definitely the actual behavior of these people is quite different than from the rest of us. So who are these people? Maybe they have their own agendas that we should look out for. And there is actually an interesting project that's called Truthy. So truthiness is a property of text or of a statement that makes you feel like it's true, but it may be false. So it gives you this gut feeling that, yeah, that's it riles people up, but it may be false. So detecting these kinds of outrageous statements is very important to see, well, maybe somebody is just trying to sway the opinion. And in this paper, they're trying to classify Twitter messages, or actually not just the messages, but the particular hashtags for whether they are astroturf. So astroturf is a fake grass. So it means that this is a fake grassroots movement. And in the end, they actually build a very decent classifier that looks at network properties of the propagation of these memes, of these hashtags, and they can detect these astroturf ones with some pretty good precision. And in fact, you can go online and track your own favorite hashtags. So they show some, so it's a Truthy project by Indiana. And so, for example, here are some networks of Truthy, so of astroturf memes. For example, they could create two users that would retweet each other and make it seem like there's a lot of conversation, but the conversation is actually between two people. Or one may be promoting the other, or there may be a bunch of accounts that are kind of empty, but except for attacking just one person. So just by the network structures of these interactions, you can catch these nefarious ones. And of course, you can look also at the legitimate ones. Sometimes there is something happening and everybody's retweeting it, or there is a more peculiar conversation where it's spreading through the network. So, okay, maybe we can find all of these tweets that are actually good, they're not AstroTurf. Well, can we actually predict an election? And this is a very important paper, very highly cited, and what it does, it looks at German elections, not US, and it builds these sentiment profiles for the various people involved in this election, and interestingly, in the end, they conclude this: the mere number of tweets reflects voter preferences and comes close to traditional election polls. So basically, the proportion of tweets that people got actually correlated pretty well with the outcome of the election. Oh, that's very neat. But they forgot to say, for this particular case, they make it sound general. Well, this caused a lot of controversy. Can we really predict elections? And there are many papers replying to it, saying what all kinds of things that could go wrong with this approach. First of all, there are two arbitrary choices that they made when they wrote this paper. First, they didn't include all of the parties. In fact, in this election, a very interesting party was running, the Pirate Party. And it was very popular online. So if you include it in this analysis, it wins the election. But of course, it didn't. Another choice that was a bit arbitrary was the dates. So if you choose just maybe another week or exclude another week in your comparison, then you get very different error rates. So there are many papers coming out about this. There are all these statements saying, well, we'll try to predict election in this country or that country. But the conclusions in almost all of them is that it doesn't work much better than baselines. And there are some really strong baselines for this problem, especially when there is a strong incumbent. So for example, when Obama was being reelected, there was a really high chance that Obama was going to continue being a US president. So beating this baseline is very difficult. And there is actually a nice literature survey if you want to learn more about this. So whenever you read something in the news about, Twitter is buzzing about this or that, maybe this is the new future, well, think again. And in fact, one of the difficulties of these papers is that the data point is one. And in science and really in any statistics, you would know that you cannot make conclusions about your approach by one point. So in this paper, we predicted actually 104 instances of public opinion change. So these were various politicians basically fighting for favoritism, and they were having lots of debates. So after each debate, people say, oh, now this person just totally messed up, we don't like them, or yes, they totally won. But when we had a very well-tuned, very well-trained classifier, we still found that, no, we couldn't predict this sort of thing. It's really, truly random. So in the end, in conclusion, so far that we know of, you cannot predict elections using Twitter. But if you did want to, what you would want to do is you should define your method before the election. You can't say, oh, yes, afterwards, of course I knew that, yes, I had some numbers that totally showed that. No, you have to do it before the election. Also, you have to know that this is not natural phenomena. This is people that are trying to influence others. These are maybe bots and spammers. And even if you find a tweet that's favorable towards some party or politician, they're not necessarily a real user. This user may not be a real potential voter, and even it is a voter, maybe they will be too lazy to go vote. So there are many steps that could fail here. And finally, so far people have been applying a lot of kind of machine learning approaches to this. Well, we look at gazillion tweets, we will feed them into our favorite machine learning algorithms, and we'll produce some kind of answers. Well, why? Why would that work? We need some good theories to tell us why look to it in the first place. So what's next? These are still two very interesting topics. Perhaps they're good for something still. And especially in a financial sector, I think there is still maybe some interesting stuff that can happen. So what I would like for people is to be honest about what they're doing, to look at the baselines and say, well, are you really improving over what is possible now? And please let us know. Don't go into Wall Street, don't go to think tank, don't get seduced by the money, but publish a paper and let us know. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Yes, first question.
Hi, I think I should ask in English too.
Sure, please, yeah, because I reply in English
okay,
anyway.
So on the first part of your talk, there was you mentioned the possible attack on the algorithm that is considering Twitter for predicting stock market. Mm-hmm. Can we do backwards? So can we find someone on the stock market who play by these rules to extract some, like, I don't know, features from his behavior on the market and say, okay, he's using Twitter data, spawn an attack and let him crash?
So it would be kind of detecting sabotage from...
Yeah. Is it possible, so you can predict backwards, not so someone looking at Twitter and saying, okay, stock market, like predicting stock market, but say backwards. So look at what he is doing and say, okay, he's using Twitter data, so we can sabotage him.
Well, causality is very difficult to go. So maybe you will correlate a lot with Twitter, but it would be difficult to say whether, you know, you are looking at Twitter or Twitter is predicting you. So without asking the person, I don't think it's really possible. Sorry. Yep.
Yes.
I have a couple of questions. First question to the audience. Please raise your hands who doesn't speak Russian. Okay, it makes sense. Okay, thank you for the presentation. I'm also from, second question to you, I'm also from Siberia. I was born in a small village between Barnaul and Biysk. And in that case, I want to know, do you have any prediction or forecast when we will all start to speak in Mandarin?
Actually, this is an interesting question because this is to get back to Twitter. There are other platforms other than Twitter, and it would be nice to connect them all. So if you look at Baidu and look at where people are tweeting about, you know, where they live and where they're going, it's also important to include, you know, other sources. But in fact, you know, my short answer is probably yes. Yeah.
Yes, another question? Yeah, there's one there.
Hey, well, my question will be maybe about the gathering. How do you gather data before to analyze it? I mean, say I want to I want to make statistics about how the very first snow in the country affects people, right? But how do I get all tweets about it? Because people usually don't tweet about snow using hashtag snow. How is there any rule of thumb for like starting point maybe?
Well, the difficulty about, so you're talking about snow,
Yeah.
you're talking about weather.
Something abstract.
So this is something you cannot predict, right? So you would have to just keep track of just, when, just if you're interested in snow activities, then just try to sample Twitter every once in a while to see if there is a spike, right? But the good thing is that you know what you're looking for. There's going to be some snow-related event. But often especially politically or even in finance, things may happen that you have no idea about, but you will be interested anyway, right? So then it's important still to have some kind of human expert to help you query, basically, because there are maybe topic detection, spiking of the topics, trending topics that you may want to take advantage of. But that particular topic that you're interested in, you better have some kind of keywords ready before it happens.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks a lot. I think we are out of the time, but thank you very much for your wonderful talk.